Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 10 of season 2. So today we are bringing back interviews with a very special guest.
Yes, indeed. I'm very excited to bring back interviews. The last 2 weeks you guys have had to just put up with us. But today we thought we'd bring in someone and we thought we'd make it appropriate to, it's always appropriate to be honest, but we thought we'd make it appropriate to the month that we are in, which we'll get to shortly. But first things first, Amber, how are you? What are you drinking? I'm drinking water. Are you drinking tea? Or what are you drinking?
I'm not drinking tea. I'm fine. I had a great weekend, so I'm feeling ready for the week. I'm having a gin and tonic. The gin is called Unit 43. It's actually like a small little bottle because my cousin got gifted this gin advent calendar for Christmas. So like each day, like it's a different little gin to try out. But obviously he didn't finish it. So now I just took some of the others that are left. And Unit 43 is one of them. And I'm just having the one. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'm just drinking water. Like Checkers has like the special brand of water that we always buy in bulk for some reason.
It's that flavored water that you order.
It's that flavored water, but
it's the best.
It's like the zero sugar flavored water. So like that's my buzz right now. So now that that's out of the way, let us introduce our guest. Welcome, Aneeqa, and thank you so much for joining us. And like thank you for just being like super keen to just hop on this interview with us.
Yes.
Aneeqa is from the LGBTQ plus community, and being Pride Month internationally, we thought it would be a good idea to have someone from the community. I mean, any time is a good time really to have like someone else on here. But like, welcome, and just please tell us more about yourself, who you are, what you do, anything you want to share.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me. I really love your podcast. It's actually my first time being on a podcast, so you guys are my first.
Yay!
Yay!
I am a POC queer woman. I am a counselor and a researcher. I study masculinities, critical men's studies. I work with mostly men of color on the Cape Flats, so we unpack positionality in an intersectional manner. I'm also I'm authoring actually a chapter with Wits' psychology department on making psychology more inclusive. So Professor Nal wrote a gender-affirming practice guidelines for SISA, and I am placing those practice guidelines in the sexual and reproductive justice framework to make psychology more inclusive. Yeah, and I'm a cat person. I am aggressively obsessed with my cat. I think he's the cutest they can ever be.
I mean, of course.
Logical, yes, but he's just so pretty. So I'm going to go with that.
Sure. We are obsessed with our dogs. So we understand. We are pet people. So
okay. We get it. We fully get it. Your background / resume sounds so impressive, and now I'm nervous because you are clearly super, super smart. So I'm even happier now that you took the time out of your, which is probably really busy schedule, to speak to us. So thank you so much. And I think when we kick off with the questions, we're going to start, just from, as we grew up, and we don't know about you, but when we were younger and in our families and communities, no one really spoke about homosexuality or being gay. Yeah. And if it did come up in conversations, it was hardly in a way that was supportive. So it was always someone, being teased or being mean. And when you were growing up, did you know much about it more yourself, or was it a topic of conversation at all?
When I was growing up, so we did grow up in two different eras, right? So I was never aware the homosexuality was a thing in the sense of this is what sexuality is, and there's a difference between being heterosexual and being part of the queer community. Heterosexuality was always like the default, right? So it's something I never questioned, and when it was brought up, I never really thought like, oh, okay, that's a big thing, until I got to university and I was given, or I was not given, but there was access to the vocabulary. Yeah. And that's how I got to that's how I started thinking about sexuality and gender, and how we were taught heterosexuality and not taught that that sexuality occurs on a spectrum, just like gender. And these things, gender is a performance, right? Nobody told me about these things. Nobody told me about sexuality. And then coming into my queer space was obviously an unlearning process that had to happen. But what I remember is there was kind of radio silence around the topic.
Yeah.
Nobody told me that there's a difference. I kind of had to find out by myself that there was a difference.
Yeah. Like personally, I was only aware that there's a difference initially in my early days because we had a friend, a neighbor who identified as a gay person, and he wasn't like out or anything, but like things he said and did was sort of a little bit obvious. And now he's obviously like openly himself, which is fantastic. But it was never like a topic of conversation because everyone just thought, well, you will marry your husband or you'll marry your wife and you'll have kids, and it is what it is. And I think as you get older, there was a lot of, like you said, like unlearning that had to happen. Whereas now with our kids, like we have the conversation as openly, or we try to normalize it. Like it's not a conversation we have where we say like, okay, so this is heterosexuality and this is what it means if you're gay and this is what it means if you like girls or boys, whatever. We literally just say like one day when you come home with a partner, whether it's a girl or a boy, we're going to be like so happy for you or whatever it may be. So it is what it is. And in an ideal world, like no one would have to actually like come out. They could just like be themselves always. But unfortunately, we don't live in an ideal world. And a lot of people are
still... No, not.
Yeah, I know. And a lot of people are still like in the closet, so to speak, because they are just like too scared to actually come out because they have been made to feel that how they feel about other people is not normal or the way that they are is not normal when it obviously completely is. So how, in your opinion, could friends and family best support their loved ones when they tell them that they are gay or even when they just suspect that they are gay, but they might be too scared to let them know?
The queer individual or the family?
The queer individual.
Okay. So being part of the community myself, I think I'm one of the luckiest people on earth to an extent where when I came into my identity, in my sexuality, it was never a thing where I kind of had to come out. To my cousins or my friends or my sister, for example. I was just like, hey, I'm gay. And they were like, okay, cool.
That's
so
amazing.
Yes, and I appreciate them every day for it. But I think for people who aren't as lucky, that the best way, first I had to learn the hard way, is that you can't change the way people see you. You would like to change the system. That's one of my goals, to change the system or just get rid of the system completely. But it will take time because patriarchy has existed for 1,000 years now. And I come with my idea for changing the system. And one of my friends actually recently came out and we had this conversation because my apologies. They come from a very religious background, right? So we had to talk around that. So I'm a counselor as well. I don't know if I mentioned that. So we had to talk around just the process of coming out and dealing with the reactions that people were going to have. So the conversation we had, and I spoke to them before I started this interview just to use their experience as an example. And I can't speak from a position of authority on every queer experience. But just on this one, it was where we spoke around love, positivity, and acceptance of ourselves and existing in our space. So that when we come out on our terms. And the reactions people have, it's got nothing to do with us. We are not at fault. We are not the problem. There's nothing wrong with us. It's their views that are complicating their feelings. And we kind of need to shift through that. And people are entitled to feel how they feel. But that shouldn't affect the way we see each other or the way we see ourselves. So Absolutely. That's kind of the conversation and the approach that I kind of think queer people should take. But again, I can't speak on earth and from an authority perspective.
How can families best support their queer families or friends?
Okay, so again, I'll speak from my experience. My friends, my family never questioned it in the sense. They were not like, oh, what, you're gay?
Yeah.
They were just like, oh, okay, cool. that's nice. Like, did you eat? Do you want to go eat? And I'm like, yeah, let's go eat, right? But again, that's in my experience, it's not always the same. And I think the only way we can support the queer community is making ourselves accessible, changing the way we think, or attempting to change the way we think and listen for comprehension, because obviously everybody doesn't have the same experience and everybody's experience is different. And if you take the time to listen and understand what the next person is saying, we will be able to find a common ground, particularly with the LGBTQIA plus community. I think, again, in my opinion, my stance, there's a gap of communication. And the leading belief is that there's something wrong. But what if we turn the belief on its head, and what if we say, if you were taught something different, or what if heterosexuality wasn't the default that you would then? What happens to your belief then?
I absolutely love the way you explain, that everyone has a different experience. And I think, friends and family should maybe, treat each person in your life that is queer. You can't treat them the same. You need to support them the way they need to be supported, because everyone has a different lived experience. And it's our job to not project onto queer people to perform in a way that's comfortable for us.
Exactly.
We need to do the listening and we need to do the unlearning. And I understood homosexuality growing up because one of my closest friends is gay. So, that's how I learned that's how I learned to support him in the way that he needs to be supported, because the way he needs my support is not in any way the same as like some of my friends who are bisexual or lesbian, for example, who have different family structures. Some families are more understanding than others, like you explained earlier. So I think it's really up to us to keep listening with comprehension, like you said. And as you learn more, you need to do better. You need to change the way you conduct yourself. You need to share your knowledge with other people in your circles, to make sure that when you see some shit going down, it's not okay. You have to voice your opinion and tell them, what's right or wrong. I think that's what every single person can do. But I just wanted to know, in general, for the LGBTQ plus community, is there anything, that you think is like a go-to that straight people have to do or that they can do to show allyship? Is it maybe social media activism? What do you think is one thing we can all do in general to do better?
I think the most important thing is education. Education is elevation, and I always lead with that. If you educate yourself, you change the way you think, which means you interact with people differently. For example, the importance of pronouns, right?
Yes.
There was this thing on Twitter like a couple of weeks ago, looking at why pronouns are important and why we should take the time to listen to the pronouns that people want to other people to address them. And one of the comments were, but the English language doesn't make room for those kind of pronouns structured that way. And the rebuttal for that was that, first of all, the English language is not necessarily our language, right? Because of the history that we live in. And then if somebody's asking you just to use a pronoun because they believe it's important to them, it's not going to make you any less of an individual. It's not going to make you any less of a person. It's not going to take away from your humanity just to use the pronoun the person is asking you to use. So I definitely think education is elevation. Even when I'm talking to young people, because I work with young people a lot, the question comes up, even with grown men, right? The question comes up whether or not sexuality is a choice, or whether somehow you can find a gene in your body for your various sexualities. And I always find it really funny in the sense that people need these concrete things to latch onto, to be like, yes, that is the gene for being LGBTQIA plus. So therefore, right? It doesn't make any sense. But then when you unpack their understanding and then I bring in my understanding and then we come to a common ground, it's a very different conversation. The conversation shifts completely because now you've provided a different way of thinking. So when I have this type of conversations, I lead with the education is elevation. So I think that's one of the important points. And another point would be activism, all kinds of activism. If you can show up, show up. If you can donate. If you can't show up all the time, because the LGBTQIA plus community, particularly in South Africa right now, requires allyship as much as we can possibly get.
Absolutely. I love that answer. And, we've of course seen, in the news, there's been such a huge spike, in hate crimes.
Yeah.
And, it's very important for all of us to do everything we possibly can.
Just in terms of the education that you were talking about, this is now off the questions that we actually sent. I find it very interesting the way that you phrase things. Are there better ways that people in general can phrase things that is more not accepting? It's just more, it's just better to hear. So as an example, I like the way you said how you came into your individuality as opposed to saying you came out. Are there better ways that we can phrase things that is just more preferred and just more comfortable for the queer community?
Definitely. I think inclusive language is such an important thing. And once we learn about inclusive language, again, it changes the conversation. For example, when I fill in biographical forms, or I fill in any form, I don't write MS, I write MX, because that's my preferred way of looking at myself. And once we acknowledge that there are various standpoints that people have, because lived experiences are important, and once we acknowledge that lived experiences are a thing, we then change the way we have conversations, because most of the people I talk to are people in high school and higher education, like undergrad, if you will. We have this conversation about inclusive language. The way we can change, the way we phrase things can change. For example, I made a mistake earlier where I said he, but they identify as them. And the conscious correctification happened because they asked to be identified with the pronouns as they and them. And I have a younger sister, so she's about 17 years old. And obviously in life orientation class, yes, the curriculum has changed to a certain extent, but the curriculum isn't as progressive as it should be to include the entire demographic of South Africa. So when there are conversations on sexuality, my sister and I, we have this conversation outside the classroom so that it can change the way she sees the world, so that the knowledge she is given is not based on a single story. There are other stories that contribute to the way she sees the world and to her knowledge production. And the more you expose anybody to knowledge, it's going to change the way they think. This is why I am a strong advocate for education is elevation, because it changes completely. If you allow yourself to be changed by it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so easy for us to hear your story and to sort of have an understanding of it, but not completely have an understanding of it, because us as heterosexual people who identify as we are straight, I am married, I have a husband and everything, I cannot even begin to comprehend the struggles you face every day, the corrections you have to do with people, or just ask them to be more aware of this and more aware of that. Are there everyday struggles that you can tell us about that the queer community, obviously, as you said, you can't speak for the whole queer community, but are there everyday struggles that you go through that we can just be more aware of?
So in my experience, again, I can only speak from my experience, as you said, because I can't speak as an authority. But for me, I know there are kind of certain spaces where I will fully immerse myself as an individual and be like, hey, I'm queer. But there are spaces where I necessarily won't, just in terms of safety and reaction and triggers. So if I am feeling mentally capable that day, it's a whole different conversation that I will have. If somebody asks me, I will then say yes. But if I'm not in the right headspace that day, I won't say anything. But again, it's my experience and where I come from, and it's also based on in terms of safety. So when you see me as an individual, you won't necessarily say that, oh, that's a queer individual.
Yeah.
Oh, but that person should belong to the LGBTQIA plus community. Like I carry a flag around.
Wow.
But I also don't partake in policing. So if I wake up one morning and I decide like, okay, hey, today I'm going to dress very masculine. I'm going to give off a very masculine aura because that's how I feel. It won't stop me from the clothes I wear. If I wake up the next day and I decide I'm going to be feminine or I'm going to kind of be in between, I do. And if people have a problem with it, again, I take a step back and I go, okay, that's you, not me. You've got to deal with all of that. So I think in terms of safety is a big concern for queer individuals because of the cis-heteropatriarchal society we live in, and particularly if we live in South Africa. I live in a community of color, and in terms of visibility, people who are part of the LGBTQIA plus community are not always visible in my community or directly visible. And it also goes back to policing, when I remember when I was younger, because your story kind of jogged a memory that I had. My next door neighbor, he identified as gay, right? But the way his body was policed, it was always expected to be masculine.
Yeah.
So he acted in that sense what I infer is that it's partly due to safety and around the whole conversation that you need to have for people to accept you into a society, which doesn't necessarily make sense, as if you need to talk to people into convincing them that you are worthy to hold space. Right? I think that's a very unnecessary conversation. So I kind of try to steer away from the conversation. So if comfortable with telling you my story, I won't. It's to safeguard me.
Yeah,
right?
that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right? And it's kind of a similar conversation I had with a very close friend of mine. So she's lesbian, but it took her quite a while to get to where she is now comfortable with herself. We had to go through phases, and before the interview, I did get her permission to have this conversation. We had to go through quite a few phases with her sexuality where she thought that she was straight for about 2.5 years. And I found it really funny because she emanates lesbianism. She emanates, like you can see. Like she's like, yes, this is who I am. And I'm like, yeah, okay, cool.
Let's go get food.
Yes, yes. Because it was really funny. We started our tertiary education together, and that's when we met, and then we've been friends ever since. So I've been so glad or grateful to be part of her journey and her sharing her space with me. So we had to go through the internalized homophobia and the policing space that she was in, because she was so certain that she was straight because the people around her told her she had to be straight and she couldn't be anything else but straight. So for like 2.5 years, she convinced herself that she was straight. She got into a heterosexual relationship. She thought like this was it. And I always found it really funny because I'm like, listen. This is not who you are. Like the world can see this is not who you are. But I was just like, okay, it's not my journey. She needs to come to the conclusion herself. And it did take her about 7 years, to get there. So we went through the internalized homophobia because of the people that she was around. We went through I don't think I'm worthy to hold this space because I don't identify. I don't identify with heterosexuality. We went through that the space is unsafe if I say it out loud, to get to a place where she is so comfortable in her individuality and her sexuality that we now laugh at the fact that a couple of years ago she thought she was super straight. It's like, I'm gonna get married to a dude.
Gonna have kids, gonna live that white picket fence life.
Exactly. And I was like, do you remember that conversation? We were sitting in a taxi going from Belmore. And she was like, yeah, I remember the conversation. And I thought you were bullshitting me. Nothing about you says straight. Nothing about you says straight.
It must feel so liberating, though. I mean, I don't know. I just live my life as myself. So, but it must feel so liberating to just be able to be yourself. I can't even. I just. It's like baffling to me that that people are living their lives not able to be themselves and not like feeling safe in certain spaces and not just being able to go anywhere. And I know that it is such a privilege for myself as a straight person to be able to just go anywhere and to just be myself and to hold my husband's hand and to like kiss him in public without like really worrying about what anyone is going to say or feel or anything, and just like feeling safe wherever we go. Are there, you don't have to name any spaces, but you can maybe say like types of spaces. Are there spaces in particular that feel most unsafe for the queer community?
I think for me, the most unsafe space is any place that is heavily religious. I know how that sounds.
No, I get it.
I get
the conversations around it.
As you said it, I thought I should have thought of that.
It's just a very awkward space for me to navigate because I don't know how to respond to the comments that people make around individuals who are sexually and gender diverse individuals. I because sometimes I just want to be like, are you okay? Do you need help? Do you need therapy? Do you need to come see me? Because that comment was very homophobic. So I don't know how to navigate those spaces really well, and those make me feel very unsafe. I know for a friend of mine, bars make them feel very unsafe.
I was about to say bars probably are super, super unsafe.
Yeah, like going to a bar that is representative of the LGBTQIA plus community is vastly different to going to a bar that is dominantly heterosexual in the sense. Like you can see the physical differences. You just feel differently in a sexually and gender diverse bar compared to a heterosexual bar, and that's just based on my experience. And a bar that is fluid, for me, it's a safe space. It's an open space. It's an accessible space. It's very different to a heterosexual bar where I fear more than one thing, let alone being my queer identity, because obviously, if you look at me, you're not going to find something that's going to say, oh, that's queer. But you're going to find something that says woman, right? And that space is fearful. Then being a queer individual is fearful. Then being a woman of color is fearful. And then combining all of those is not a great space for me to be in. So then bars, I think universities for one of my friends was an unsafe space because they were triggered and there wasn't any counseling available because psychology is a very cis heteropatriarchal discipline, right? And the conversation surrounds the binary and people counsel in accordance to the binary. So Professor Nell developed the gender affirming mental health practice guidelines, which is the first of its kind on the African continent, right? So that is still in development. It hasn't even been incorporated into the curriculum. And people are starting to now realize what critical psychology is and what African psychology is. And people have been psychologists for years on the African continent in South Africa, right? And not everybody has that understanding. So the discipline is largely still the same. So then that makes spaces unsafe and inaccessible for queer individuals. So those are the experiences I'm aware of. The others is just based on the research that I've done and interviews that I've listened to and the news that I've read.
And speaking of research and news and all this kind of things, I do think we should share, what we can with the people who listen. And in addition to, reading up on the news and sharing knowledge, are there any foundations or organizations that you would recommend for us to follow or to support to learn more about how we can be better allies?
Okay, so the Triangular Project is really great. I love the work that they do, and it's queer-centered, obviously. That's one. I know Sadki is also involved in the work with queer individuals. So those are my two favorite organizations. Aside from that, I do own an NPC that provides counseling to LGBTQIA plus community because I want to make psychology accessible to the queer community.
Amazing.
That is amazing.
Thank you. It's still in the development stages. I'm still working out everything, basically, because I kind of just threw myself in the deep end. And this is kind of how MIW came about, but it's still in its working stages. Most of the people we have to volunteer are all female. So we decided okay, how do we emulate what we're trying to establish? And so that's how MIW was kind of born, because we want to lead with femininity in the sense, but with a fluid form of femininity.
That makes absolute sense. And please do keep us, updated if you have the time. We'd love to support and spread the word as much as we possibly can.
For sure.
Both on the podcast and in our personal capacities.
Definitely. You can follow us on Instagram. We do have an Instagram. We are busy with the Facebook page. Like I said, it's all in the development phases.
That is so interesting. I'd love to just chat more about that. Thank you for all of that. You have completely blown our minds as to everything you do and everything that you're about to do. Is there anything else you'd like to share, any more advice you'd like to give before we sign off?
I think the only last thing I'd like to say is that to any queer individual that is listening, it's okay to be where you are right now. It's okay to sit with the hurt and the sadness that you feel right now, because it will pass. It will pass, and the person you are now or the person you are becoming takes a lot of growth, and it will hurt like hell because growth is uncomfortable, but it's an individual you will be proud of. Eventually, you just got to take your shit and go with it.
Yeah.
And just a reminder that the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. It's a really important lesson that I had to learn, and I think there's a lot of people that kind of need to learn that as well. And if the toxicity is there, I suggest you leave it behind and you just go be you in your own space.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing your knowledge. Thank you for taking the time. We really, really do appreciate it. And we think you are just absolutely great. And we'd love to chat to you sometime soon again if you are willing to join us.
And thank you so much for listening. And to anyone else listening, if you need a safe space, if you just want to vent, if you just want to reach out and say hi, or you just need support in any way, you can definitely reach out to us on our social media channels, which we will put in the episode description. And you can reach out to us on email at info@browngirlsguide.co.za. And if you need tips, tricks, whatever it may be, we're there and we've got your back. And we're there to support each other. So on that note, Aneeqa, thank you so much once again. We will chat to you soon. Thank you everyone for tuning in.
Thank you so much for having me. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.